Hi kids, it's Mrs. Fravel. How are you? Good. Me too. I'm fine. And if you're not good, I'm sorry. I hope things get better. I hope things get better soon for all of us, every one of us, right? As we deserve it. All right. Welcome to day 2 of cell biology, cellular structure and function. Today your starter, which you should have already done before clicking into this little magical video of mine, was about water. We covered the properties of water in the last unit, in Unit 5, in biochemistry, and I was a little not super thrilled about some of your responses. Some of you killed it, did great on the test. Some of you seemed to have not done the water properties, especially if you work from home. Wow, it's the end of the day. Fravel's hair. Anyway, sorry. So let's just talk really quickly about the properties of water because they do come into play a lot when we talk about cells, because cells are surrounded by and full of water. You are mostly water. All cells are mostly water, and a single-celled organism, except for bacteria, are always in water, and some bacteria also live in water, but they have some special adaptations so that they can dry out. But let's talk about, just really quickly, when you did the starter question, you should have read all of the things. Of course you did. And looked at the picture, right? Of course you did. So water molecules, remember, are made of 2 hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom. And they, the way that they are constructed, they are bound together, those atoms, by a covalent bond. That means that hydrogen's little electrons are shared with the oxygen. Oxygen is a big electron hog. It likes to get all of the electrons because it doesn't have enough of its own. So electrons are negatively charged. So what happens is in a water molecule that creates a negative net charge at the oxygen end and a positive charge at the hydrogen ends. Hydrogens are positive. They like everybody. They like to share their electrons, and they're super attracted to everything that is negative. So in a quantity of water, all of the hydrogens in that water are superficially sort of also attracted to the other oxygens in the other molecules of water around it. And they form what's called hydrogen bonds. And those hydrogen bonds are very fluid and breakable, and they reform. And this is what creates the special properties of water, including adhesion, cohesion, universal solvent, high heat capacity, and makes water less dense as a solid. Ice floats. So your question, both on your test and in this starter, were to apply those to biological system, especially thinking about it on a cellular level. Okay, so I hope you were able to think a little more about it or look that up at this point. That's fine, since you've already done your test. Go investigate how water, these particular properties of water, contribute to living systems, and especially living cells and living bodies. And I'll just give you some quick examples. Adhesion, what that is when water molecules stick to other things. Other things get wet. What that helps create is situations where living cells can incorporate water a little easier. Cohesion is when water sticks to itself. Okay, so when you get a glob of water, like a drop, or when you when we did the water lab and you saw stacking water on top of a penny and how big that water bulge can get. We also talk about surface tension and capillary action, and those are functions of cohesion and adhesion. And surface tension helps water be taken up in bigger quantities. So it's easier for a living body to move water into it. It's also easier for plants to take up water from the soil with both that globular nature of water and also the capillary action as water sticks to the insides of plants' vascular tubes and it climbs against gravity. The molecules of water actually climb up those root tubes, and that helps facilitate plants taking up water in large quantities and passing it on to whatever eats them, okay? And transpiring it into the atmosphere that you breathe and you see as clouds. Okay, water's universal solvency. It can pull apart biological molecules. It helps break apart macromolecules so that they can be absorbed in smaller packets by cells. They're pulled apart, and then cells can move those nutritive molecules into across their plasma membrane, which we'll talk about today. And so it helps dissolve those bigger molecules and salts so that they can be used by cells. High heat capacity, water keeps you warm. Dude, your body's 70-something% water. And water doesn't change temperature well, so it helps insulate and keep a body warm enough to do all of its metabolic functions, because otherwise proteins break apart if it's too cold or too hot. So water helps keep that temperature stable. And again, water is less dense when it's ice. Ice floats. So if you've got a body of water, and in the winter, if it's in a temperate region of the planet, that might get cold enough to freeze, but you're going to get this layer of ice on top of a lake or on top of a river. And as long as it isn't exceedingly cold or cold for or a very shallow body of water, you're just going to get a layer of ice on the top. Underneath that is going to be liquid water. And that floating block of ice will keep it fluid. The pressure, and it helps lock in a little bit of temperature so it can keep this liquid water under the ice. That's where living things are going to be, and they're going to be able to survive in that liquid water. Okay? So make sure you know those. You should have already watched me talk about all of that one time, but a lot of you were late turning in that assignment, so make sure you're staying caught up on everything. And I know it is not easy to work at home. I feel that to my core. Please make sure that you are every day doing all of the things that you're supposed to do for this class, okay? You can do it. I believe in you, and I'm here to help you, so reach out to me anytime you need. All right, that's enough starter questions. Let's talk about cell membranes. Last time we were together, we talked about the different types of cells. We talked about prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes are bacteria and archaebacteria. These are the simplest type of cells. These are single-celled organisms. All they have is a membrane, a wall around that membrane, some DNA inside, some cytoplasm, and some ribosomes. They can also have a few other things that we won't talk about, but they are the simplest. And then eukaryotic cells, those are plant, animal, and fungi cells, and they are the ones with all the organelles, mitochondria, and their DNA is inside of a, say it out loud, good, nucleus. Okay, so let's talk about the membrane parts of cells. So what do we mean by a membrane? Membrane around a cell, membrane-bound organelles. What the heck is a membrane? Okay, so cell membranes, especially the plasma membrane, which is the membrane that encloses the entire cell, it defines the boundary of the cell, right? That's like the outside of the cell. And all cells are surrounded by and filled with mostly water. Okay, so again, they depend on water to keep them plump and to move compounds and other things through, in and out of the cell. So the cell's integrity relies on that plasma membrane, and it regulates as well what comes into and goes out of a cell. All cells have to move stuff in and out. Cells make products, and cells have to move in nutrients. They have to move in water. Sometimes there's too much of something inside of a cell, and that membrane's got to help that cell move it out, especially water. Remember the phenomenon we talked about that you should have done about the woman who drank so much water she died? This is where you want to pay attention, okay, for that. So how are cell membranes constructed? They are what's called a lipid bilayer. So every cell membrane is made up of just 2 layers of molecules, and those molecules, which I'll show you the structure of in just a sec, has 2 parts to it. Every molecule has a fatty acid tail and that is hydrophobic. So the little tails do not like water. Okay, that's what hydrophobic means. Hydro always means water. Phobic means dislike or fear of. So the tail part of the molecules are hydrophobic. Every molecule also has a little head, and that one is hydrophilic. It likes water, so it is going to, and all of these molecules get together and they cluster together with the head ends pointing toward water, the tail ends pointing away from water. And since there is water both outside and inside of a cell, you get two layers of phospholipids with the heads pointing out and the tails pointing in. And that is what creates the plasma membrane, the nuclear membrane around the DNA, the membrane around mitochondria, and then other organelles that we'll talk about next week that are also membrane bound. Okay, so if we have the cell illustration, and I'm sorry I don't have a credit on here. I should be crediting my photos. I'm sorry. The inside of the cell is mostly water and protein. That's called cytosol. It makes up the cytoplasm. And then the outside of the cell, the extracellular area, if this is a cell that's part of a multicellular body, it's going to be packed up against other cells, but there's always liquid surrounding your tissues in a multicellular body. Okay, so if we zoom into this part, we can see these little hydrophilic heads on both sides, two layers of these molecules with the tails pointing inside, and this is what each molecule looks like. Here's its little hydrophilic head, and then its fatty acid tails that do not like water, so they're going to point away. This is a natural phenomenon. These molecules just do this. If you've ever blown bubbles with soap bubbles, when you were little and dipped the little wand in the little bottle and blow the bubbles. Okay, bubbles are also a phospholipid bilayer. Okay. So they just naturally do that, and that's how they form a sphere, is just this natural tendency for the heads and tails to line up as they do. Okay. You should be taking notes on the note guide that's associated with this. You know that. It's on the instructions. Read the instructions. Anyway, label these on your notes as best you can. If you printed out the notes, great. Or if you're writing the notes, perfect. Draw one of these guys, draw a little bit of this, and label the phospholipid bilayer with the hydrophobic tails, hydrophilic heads. Make sure you know that this is what a cell membrane looks like on a molecular level. Okay? Okay, but there's more. There's always more. So cell membranes are what we call a fluid mosaic model. Those molecules aren't linked together. They're not bonded to each other. They're just floating around. But just the way that they orient to water keeps them pointing in those directions. So they move and flow past each other, and interspersed and inserted between all of those phospholipids are membrane proteins. Okay? And again, we call this a fluid mosaic membrane. This is all moving and shifting around. You can poke it and it'll wave. This video I will link underneath this one, and it's really, really good. Watch that. Watch that video. Watch the video. Okay? Okay. Let's talk about those proteins really quickly. There are four simple-ish kinds of proteins in a membrane. There are channel proteins. So that's a protein that goes all the way through the membrane, through both layers, and it's got a tube in the middle. Channel proteins help create a passage through the cell membrane that larger or charged molecules can diffuse through. And we're going to talk about diffusion in just a sec. And we also have receptor proteins, and these are stuck to the outside as surface proteins or the inside as surface proteins, and they just kind of communicate with other cells and communicate inside of the cell what's going on with the cell. They also grab signaling compounds. Then we also have transporter or protein pumps, and these move large molecules in and out of the cell, very often across or against a concentration gradient. That will make more sense in a minute. So these are actually little proteins that deform. They change shape, and there's another video that you need to watch that will show you that. These are, and gated protein, I put that in the wrong place because gated proteins are all actually a kind of channel protein. So sorry, my bad. And then we have tethered and anchored proteins that do all kinds of things. They have a stamp on them. Some of them have a little stamp on them that says, I belong to this body. Please don't kill me, immune system. And they send signals, they move energy, they do all kinds of things. The proteins in the cell membrane, kind of cool. And here's a very general but very good illustration of some of them. So receptors, channel proteins, you can see that it's got that little tube that runs through it just so molecules can flow in and out of the cell. And some of them have little gates on them. And that's a closed gate, and then it'll pop open and allow molecules to rush through. There are also aquapores, so they're channels that just let water through. And again, we have the lipid bilayer, transport proteins that will deform to let molecules in and out. They use energy. I'll talk about that too in a minute. Okay, and then signaling proteins, they have carbohydrates on them. Sometimes they have glycoproteins on them, and that is on your worksheet for today. Glycoproteins are just a protein that have a sugar stuck to them. Glyco is sugar. Okay? Those are signalers. Okay, all right. So how do you move things across a membrane? They just go. How about that? They just go. So membranes are semi-permeable or selectively permeable. That means they only allow some molecules in and out of the cell or across the cell. And there's two kinds of transport. There's active and passive transport. I'm going to talk about both of those. Talk about passive transport first. Passive transport just doesn't require any energy output from the cell. It follows the rules of kinetic movement or kinetic random movement. And there's three kinds. Diffusion. This is just the natural movement of molecules from an area where they are highly concentrated to an area where they are not as concentrated. So if you, for instance, spray perfume in the air, if you're right there, you could really smell it. And after a little while, if you are 5 feet away, maybe you can, then you can smell it. So the molecules have diffused through the air, okay? Just naturally. Again, it's through kinetic motion. The molecules, when they are tightly concentrated together, they just randomly move and they bounce off of each other. And they bounce off of each other, and they start to spread out because they're bouncing off of each other. So that's diffusion, and they go from where they're concentrated to where they're more spread out and don't bounce off of each other quite so much. Okay? When it comes to a membrane, this results in molecules moving across the membrane from where there's more of them to where there's less of them, either outside to inside the cell or vice versa. And small molecules, non-polar molecules, they can fit right in between those, the phospholipid bilayer, between the molecules in the bilayer. So this is stuff like oxygen, carbon dioxide, really, really small lipids, and water. Sometimes can just, small amounts of water can slip right between those phospholipids molecules. I'm fine. I'm just trying to talk fast. Sorry. And they just follow the rules of diffusion. Just randomly moving according to their concentration gradient, which is what we call high concentration to low concentration. That's the concentration gradient. If that diffusion movement is water moving across a membrane, that's osmosis. Still same rules of diffusion, but it's just water across a membrane, and water goes from high concentration to low concentration. If you didn't hear me, back that up 10 seconds, listen to that again, because it has to do with your phenomenon for this unit, okay? And then the third type of passive transport is facilitated diffusion. Same rules. It is kinetic random movement from high to low concentration, but it's larger molecules that don't fit between the phospholipid molecules, so they go through one of those channel proteins that I talked about. And the channel protein is the facilitator. That's a helper. Facilitated just means that it gets some help, okay? And that's what the channel protein does. It provides a larger space for larger molecules to move through, okay? Any questions? Okay, great. Again, diffusion, molecules always randomly, naturally, because of the laws of physics, move from where there are a lot of them, highly concentrated, to where there aren't as many, low concentration. Okay, so you can see in these illustrations, so passive transport, we get the solute, those are the molecules dissolved in water, moving right through and in between the lipid bilayer molecules from high concentration, many, many, to low concentration, not so many. And then we get also that facilitated diffusion where there's this little channel helper that is helping these larger molecules move through. Maybe they're water, and that's an aquapore, which is a channel protein that moves water through. I have been talking all day. I'm talking way too much. So sorry. Okay. Again, that was passive transport. Let's talk about active transport. It's the other kind of transport. Active transport requires an input of energy. It needs a little from the cell. Okay? The cell uses energy to move molecules across the membrane, and it's generally moving them against their concentration gradient. It does not want that much water inside of it, so it has to actively pump water out. It can also do this with sodium and potassium and other large molecules that tend to diffuse in. The cell has to actively pump that out, and it uses these transporter proteins that actually change shape. And the cell uses a molecule or two of ATP, which is what mitochondria make. Mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, right? They make ATP. That powers stuff like this inside of a cell so that it can regulate its metabolism and keep its functionality going. So that's just one use for ATP. Okay? Again, active transport uses energy, pumps molecules against the concentration gradient from low concentration to high concentration. Okay? Make sure you know that. Make sure you know that. Write that underlined stuff down again. Okay. All right. There's two videos. I will link them under this video because they're good. Especially, yeah, both of them. Really good. Okay. All right. A couple more things and then I'm done. So cells don't just move small molecules, they move big molecules because that's what cells make. Cells make big molecules. They also have waste products that they have to move out of them. And if they're molecules that are too large to go through a transporter protein or through the lipid bilayer itself, they employ what's called exocytosis. Oh, listen to that. Which is a big word that means out of a cell. So exo means out of. The cell, the word part cyto, here's a thing to keep in your back pocket. The word part cyto always means cell. Whenever you see C-Y-T-O, that means cell, something to do with a cell. Okay? So exocytosis is moving large molecules out of a cell. Cells all make a product. Every cell in your body makes a product. Your skin cells make collagen and elastin, and that is made inside of the cell, needs to be transported out of the cell. Your pancreas cells make a hormone called insulin, which regulates your blood sugar. That insulin in the pancreatic cells has to be moved out of the pancreatic cells and released into the bloodstream. Hormones in your brain, hormones in your other glands. So those are all produced in the cell and then moved by exocytosis out of the cell to be either released as waste or released as a product for other cells in the body to use. And essentially what happens is a membrane capsule inside the cell forms, and it's the same membrane. It's still just a phospholipid bilayer will form around the product, and it will be moved by really awesome little motor proteins. I'll show you those next week toward the edge of the cell. And then just by their nature, those membranes fuse together, opens up the vesicle, and that product is released from the cell. Okay, and there's a micrograph of it actually happening again. Sorry, I don't know where this came from. This picture, I've had it forever. Okay, so here's an exocytic vesicle that has fused with the plasma membrane, which is this little line that I'm tracing. Oh, sorry. So the cell's plasma membrane is there, and then this. And here's another one over here getting ready to fuse. Those are the vesicles. This one has fused with the cell membrane and out the cell product. Okay, and then opposite of that is endocytosis. Cells have to move that stuff back into them. If it's a product that they need that they don't make, they will endocytosis large molecules into themselves. It's also how amoeba eat. Amoeba and other animal single-celled organisms like protists, amoeba, paramecia, they don't have mouths. They're a single cell. How do they eat? They will They will surround a macromolecule or a smaller cell or a bacterium, if that's what they're eating. They'll surround it with their own plasma membrane, pinch it off, and then they'll move it into to digest it. It's pretty cool. So that's endocytosis. Endo into cyto, cell into the cell. Okay, I'm getting all kinds of dings. It's time to go home. Okay, so you should have this on your notes, label it as best as you can, make sure you know the difference between endocytosis, moving stuff into a cell, big things. This is not diffusion. This is a lot of energy, pinching things in and releasing stuff, okay? So these are both active transport, endo and exocytosis, okay? Whew. Yeah, I think I'm done. Okay. So I apologize, the wrong title is on here. On Canvas, your assignment is the cell membrane and transport worksheets. Ignore the word POGL on here. Cell membrane and transport worksheets, those are due on Wednesday, next time we meet. Your test for this unit will be next week. We have one more week until Christmas break. Hopefully we make it that long without getting COVID shut down again. So your test will be next week. We'll also do a lab. So if you are working from home by choice and you can come to school if you're not in quarantine or you're not sick, and I'm sorry if you're sick, if you can come to school on Wednesday, there's going to be a lab, so you should come to school. It'll be cool. Okay? Okay. Talk to you soon. Have a great day. Go do your assignment. Be good, be safe, be kind, and we'll see you soon.